The crimson sands of Caldros 7 stretched endlessly beneath 3 dying suns, and Evan Cross knew he was being followed. He'd noticed the shadows first, sleek, prowling shapes that matched his pace from the ridgelines. Then came the low growls, carried on winds that tasted of copper and desperation. The scanner on his wrist had identified them hours ago. Rakesh. Apex predators. Pack hunters with serrated fangs and claws that could shred titanium plating. Most explorers would have called for an emergency extraction. Evan simply kept walking, his boots crunching over crystalline dust, his pack heavy with supplies he'd gathered from the abandoned colony outpost. By the time the first sun dipped below the horizon, the pack had grown bolder. Evan could see them now. 7 creatures, each the size of an earth lion but built like nightmares. Midnight scales that absorbed light, eyes like molten gold, muscles coiled beneath armored hides that had evolved to survive this brutal world. They were starving. Evan could see it in the way their ribs pressed against their sides, in the sluggish movements that should have been lightning quick. The ecological collapse that had driven the human colonists away had devastated the local fauna too. These magnificent killers were reduced to following a lone human, hoping weakness would make him prey. He stopped walking. The pack froze, uncertain. This wasn't how prey behaved. Slowly, deliberately, Evan lowered himself to the ground. He sat cross-legged on the sand, his back straight, hands visible. The largest of the Rakesh, clearly the alpha, stepped forward. Its scales were darker than the others, marked with scars from countless battles. Intelligence burned in those golden eyes, along with something else. Hunger, and beneath it, a terrible, desperate pride. Alpha Rakor, Evan said softly, reading the translation his implant provided. The creature's ear flaps twitched at the sound of its designation. I see you. The alpha's lips curled back, revealing teeth like surgical blades. A warning, a threat, but it didn't attack. Evan reached into his pack, the pack tensed, ready to spring. But instead of a weapon, Evan pulled out a ration container. The smell of protein paste and synthesized grains wafted across the sand. 7 pairs of golden eyes tracked the movement with laser focus. I know what it's like, Evan said, breaking the seal. To be hungry, to have pride but need help. He'd been 12 when the famines hit Earth's reclamation zones. He remembered what it felt like to be hungry enough to hate yourself for it, to feel shame burn hotter than the need in your belly. Evan scooped out a portion and placed it on the ground between himself and the alpha. Then he slowly pushed it forward with his boot. Alpha Rakor's nostrils flared, the scent of food after weeks of starvation. But the creature didn't move. Its eyes locked with Evan's, a test. A question, what game is this, human? No game, Evan said. He took another container from his pack, opened it, and began eating. Just lunch, and I have enough to share. For a long moment, nothing happened. The wind howled. The suns continued their descent. The pack waited for their leader's decision. Then, with a grace that belied its size, Alpha Rakor stepped forward. It lowered its massive head and ate. The moment the alpha fed, the rest of the pack surged forward but stopped at a sharp bark from their leader. Rakor turned to them, made a series of clicking sounds, and the pack arranged themselves in a circle. Orderly. Dignified. Evan smiled and began distributing rations. He had 15 containers. He gave them 12. As the Rakesh ate, something remarkable happened. The aggressive posturing faded. The desperation in their movements eased. They didn't eat like mindless beasts. They ate like people who had been starving and suddenly remembered they were more than their hunger. Alpha Rakor finished first. The massive predator regarded Evan with those golden eyes, and this time there was no threat in them. Slowly, deliberately, the alpha lowered itself to the ground and rested its head on its paws. A position of vulnerability, of trust. The other 6 followed their leader's example. Evan had read about Rakesh pack dynamics in the colonial reports. He understood what he was seeing. This wasn't submission. This was acceptance. They had chosen to see him not as prey or threat, but as something else entirely. Pack. We're a long way from the functioning ecosystem zones, Evan said, pulling up his holomap. But there's a valley about 40 kilometers north. The collapse didn't hit there as hard. Game is scarce but present. He looked at Rakor. I can't feed you forever, but I can show you where the food is. The alpha's ear flaps twitched. Those intelligent eyes studied the holographic display. then returned to Evan's face. Understanding passed between them, two apex species communicating across the vast gulf of evolution. Rakor stood and made a low, rumbling sound. The pack rose with their leader, but they didn't leave. They waited. Evan shouldered his pack and started walking north. 7 shadows fell into formation around him, not following but accompanying, protecting. The colonial reports had been wrong about many things. They'd assumed Rakesh were merely animals, operating on instinct alone. They'd never stopped to wonder what intelligence might look like in a species that had never needed technology to dominate their world. They'd never thought to offer kindness. As they traveled through the cooling desert night, Evan found himself thinking about humanity's place in the galaxy. Other species had bigger ships, stronger weapons, older civilizations. But humans had something else, a strange capacity to see people in the most unexpected places, to extend mercy when logic said to conserve resources, to share lunch with monsters and somehow make friends. Maybe that was humanity's real strength. Not that they were the toughest or the smartest, but that they kept trying to expand the definition of us to include everyone they met. By the time they reached the valley 3 days later, the pack had learned to respond to Evan's voice commands. And Evan had learned to read the subtle movements of Rakesh communication. Alpha Rakor had even allowed Evan to check its wounds, infected scratches from fighting over the scarce prey, and treat them with medical supplies. When game birds exploded from the scrub brush, the pack worked together with devastating efficiency. They brought down enough food for days, and when they fed, Alpha Rakor dragged a portion to Evan's camp and left it there, a gift, an acknowledgement, a repayment of debt. Evan accepted it with the same quiet dignity with which it was offered. When the extraction shuttle finally arrived 2 weeks later, Evan stood at the valley's edge with his unlikely companions. The pilot's voice crackled over the comm. "Cross, we're detecting multiple hostile life forms in your vicinity. Get to the pickup zone now." "Negative," Evan replied, scratching behind Rakor's ear flaps the way the Alpha seemed to enjoy. "They're not hostile. They're friends." The pack watched as Evan boarded the shuttle. Alpha Rakor stood at the front, head held high, golden eyes reflecting the shuttle's lights. As the craft lifted off, Evan saw the Alpha raise its head and release a howl, long, mournful, but not sad. A farewell. A thank you. A promise. The galaxy was full of civilizations that had mastered the stars through conquest and cold calculation. Humanity was still learning, still stumbling, still making mistakes. But sometimes on the right day, a human could look at something terrifying and see past the teeth and claws to the person underneath. Could turn predators into pack, enemies into allies with nothing more than compassion and a shared meal. And maybe, Evan thought as Kaldros' 7th fell away beneath them, that was enough. That was more than enough.